If anyone in the audience has questions, we could start there. Be more than happy to. Sure.
So, a lot of IP is now, designed at different companies. So there's a cross-organization, cross-company flow, and a lot of people have been saying you need this branching, you need visibility of versions, you need visibility of bugs, you need a dynamic relationship with your IP provider. How do you manage that in this business model that's going between different companies, and how do you get the IP provider to have the incentive to tell you how many versions they add, and what the bugs are, and make sure that you get the latest test cases and things?
Okay. Which one of you has had some experience and might want to address this?
I can try. So it's an interesting relationship when you try to purchase IP from a third-party vendor. Most third-party vendors are very reluctant to show you much of the content. You'll typically just get GDS-lef, timing views, Verilog, and that's pretty much it. So trying to get them to disclose, probably you'll need some sort of contractual arrangement to be able to get them to disclose more than that. Right? You will also have the problem of the probability that their internal design management system, whatever it be, is probably different than yours. So that's one of the challenges of purchasing third-party IPs.
So do we need standards for communication between the different management systems to allow that, since some people won't move?
Yeah, it's not clear to me that standards is the right answer. I think a free flow of information, is the key. And, different people have different, notions of what that visibility is. For example, people who are doing hard macros, they don't want you to know anything about it because you're going to figure out, through their development cycle what happened. But I think there was a point, I think Gary made that last year during his presentation, that only 7% of IP is actually purchased from external vendors, right? You've got Synopsys, you've got ARM, and then you've got all, the cottage industry. But the majority is, internal reuse, right, Gary?
Yeah, most of it is internal, and now that we're moving up to this platform-based model, the requirements are that you hand off a complete verification test bench and verification. One of the issues that has not been resolved is, does that mean do I hand over the bug history, so that has not been worked out yet. But the issue is that, hey guys, you either do it or you're not in the business. We don't care anymore. We have to. We're buying large blocks. I mean, these things are, as I say, some of them come out to 50 million gate blocks, and we have to know how to verify those things because verification is such a big cost. So. The business model is changing dramatically, but what you're seeing now is most of the stuff, as Broadcom says, they do it in-house. They don't even fool with third party.
All right. Next question.
With all this local copy of your workspaces now, with being multi-giga, workspaces, do you care about backup, or do you even, do you take backup, or you just follow the policy check-in, or you don't have it? Everyone thinks that's the best thing, but not every designer do that.
If it's not checked in, it doesn't exist. I mean, that's our attitude at NVIDIA. Now, we have rarely, until a year ago, I would have said we've never lost any storage. We had an event where we lost one volume in the over 11 years that I've been there. But in general, our attitude is we tell our designers, look, if you don't check it in, it doesn't exist. So check it in, right? I mean, we have so many petabytes of storage on our engineering farm, we can't afford to back them up. So we don't. And since the vast majority of the stuff that we care about, really what I mean is everything that we care about, needs to be checked in, we just tell them to check it in.
Second question was,
do you back up everything that's checked in?
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Yes.
I mean, it's not only backed up to tape, it's snap copied off site, it's in other data centers. Yeah, I mean, it's many copies of it around the world. So yes, it's totally backed up. Yep.
Second question was, somebody on the panel talked about integrating coverage with data management. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
So I put that in my slides. It's probably more of the best practices to do that sort of thing. Essentially, IP, as it's being developed, it goes through multiple phases of maturity. You, as a management organization, you really want to make sure that you've got the finalized IP that has hit whatever criteria you have for test coverage or various types of sanity or design checks. Having a mechanism to see that in a correlation to a design database is also a good piece of high-level management data.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question for Jacob on what problems you're having with storage bottlenecks.
Yeah, one of the issues that really frustrates me is just to get disk to build a project can be a really long and time-consuming process fighting IT. And I mean, we have times where we have to fill in purchase recs just to get a terabyte of space, and the engineer's like, just go out and buy it. I'll pay for it. I'll give you the $200 to go buy a terabyte disk. And it's just really frustrating on how we have to kind of do that. We're really excited about going to this new model where we can quickly build and tear down workspaces across any kind of disk. So now we've started just purchasing our own disks, large volumes of disks. We can kind of just go and you need disk, we can just build you a project here. Where before in our prior system, we were really, the way it was architected, we were really restricted to doing all the work on a physical disk. And now we're able to distribute that across a lot of disks. And then we want to take advantage of some of the new features in IC Manage, that allows us to quickly build workspaces without taking up any disk space as well.
How many people have disk space issues during the design and verification process?
Maybe. What do you mean by disk space issues? Do you mean not enough space, or do you mean not fast enough?
Let's talk about quantity, i.e., you need more than you have. You got to spend time going to get it. You have to go back and delete a bunch of stuff that you don't really want to delete because you need the space. That kind of issue. Show hands. Yeah. Okay.
Come to NVIDIA.
Okay. Question.
So you identified some best practices. The real challenge, I think, is how do you get the engineering community from your analog guy to your RTL guy to your coder to actually adopt and use those practices? And what have you found in your companies that you could enable that? What were the techniques you used to drive it?
Talk soft and carry big stick.
You're basically going to have to get management to be aligned with that practice. I mean, if your engineering VPs and senior VPs and executive VPs don't believe that their IP is worth anything and to keep it in a data management solution, you're hosed. I mean, it's not going to happen, right? I mean, you need to get everyone to agree that that's the thing. It can't be left up to engineer X or engineer Y who says, I don't need that, right? It needs to be, an edict throughout the organization that you're going to do that. I mean, otherwise you can't get it to happen. I don't think.
I think some of the things that I've done is I'll have that story I told about the band gap. So it's a really simple and concrete example that everyone can understand. Here you have this small block of IP. It's critical for the entire chip, not just the radio. And you can easily see how it could go through multi-stages of verification and be cleaned at every step of the way. And all of a sudden, once you're in production, it blows up on you. And just that fear of having to deal with that whole process of tracing it back and catching that at ATE, I think it creates a real need and effect on engineers. And that gets them to kind of stop copying and understand why we're putting in these rules.
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
So for tool developers, one guy's design is another guy's test case. So it seems like there may be a need for another level of integration, because everything that somebody's talking about, lots of different versions and lots of data, when we're building internal tools, we've got the same problem. Somebody went and changed their design on us, and we were pointing to that as a progression test case, and now they've changed the rules and we can't reproduce results. So do you see a need for your internal methodology flows and everything else to be able to preserve versions of designs in order to get that same quality in the tools and flows you're using to develop the product as well as the product itself?
Yeah, I think that's standard configuration management practices, right? You do it across not only your design data sets, but you do it on your internal scripts as well as the versions of the tools that specifically run across that block, right? So that if you do need to go back and build test cases or do your QA, you have the full profile of every dependency. Now, computing those dependencies is a number of different ways to do it. But that is an important part, of the flow management.
Okay.
You mentioned linking the IP repository into the bug tracking system. I'm curious, nobody mentioned the design specification or other documentation that goes with the design. Is that typically put in the same repository as the IP itself, or how do you keep that coordinated?
One of the things that we do is we have it parallel. We'll have like a different library type, which we call documentation, and all the engineers can go in there and just put in all the documentation for that. That gets tagged along with the design data, so that can go together as a unit. One of the things that we're also adding at a finer level to kind of do filtering is we're taking advantage of properties within IC Manage, so that allows us to kind of tag different IP blocks, for example, as functionality or technology, things like that, so that we can actually filter them or even gate designs. For example, we've had some issues in the past where we're RF group and we're very picky about how the pads are. If the ESD team goes and they puts a lot of diodes to protect ESD diodes to protect things, they're doing a good job to make sure the chip passes ESD, but then that'll kill our RF performance. So we just say, well, there's no point in passing our ESD if the chip doesn't work. So we just rip it all out, and then we have ESD issues, and we start pointing fingers at each other. So by using properties in IC Manage, we'll say, okay, here, you guys have to check this box here. We check this box here. Everyone knows what everyone's doing, and if it blows up, we can kind of know how to triage that later on. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do with the documentation end.
So at NVIDIA, we store the documentation in the tool as well. So it goes into the same source code repository as everything else.
Here in the front.
For building your components using a specific version of IP, how about the version of the software tools that you use and the type of machine that it was run on, because newer software may not run on an older machine. You want to go recreate something. Plus, many times you've got well, for me it's simulation, you've got a little script that you run that's got command line parameters. If you forget what those are, you can get hosed.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We don't do anything about archiving old machines, but I've run into issues where we've had to try to recreate an old database, and we don't have any old machines to do it. So hopefully those are a real small percentage, and try to find other ways to get around that part. But we are trying to, one really important thing I think also on that list is to add the version of the simulation models. In analog and RF simulation, those models, they could be changing every week. And that's one thing that we don't do right now is actually track that version. So we're trying to and that becomes a bigger effort. How do you do that within the context? We want that within our team, but now do we start copying all the models and pulling everything into IC Manage so that we can manage it? We're trying to get a bigger, broader buy-in across the entire company so that we can kind of do that more effectively. If we can get the modeling team to switch over to IC Manage, then they can do releases, and then we can just easily import it instead of us having to kind of do things like that. So I think that is one of the most important things we're focusing on is simulation models and then versions of tools.
So the whole problem has expanded from just IP to the entire process.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Okay, one last question before we wrap up.
We have no problem tracking hard IP, from creation, GDS to tape out. Our problem is with soft IP and how we retain the watermark or the tag on the RTL side all the way through GDS. Have you guys found a way of doing that or a solution to that?
I don't know, they're all looking at each other.
We don't have a lot of external IP, so it's not really a problem to worry about.
Well, internal as well.
So internally, we have some customers who they take the RTL and then they introduce additional constructs into the RTL, which then get placed when you do your place and route with these dummy cells, and those dummy cells actually have no connections to them, but they have metal, typically at the highest layer, so that you, depending on your metal stack choice, that puts identification information in there. However, that makes it a little bit more complex for doing for DFT, your scan chain insertion, and all that kind of stuff. But companies have developed those internal systems where they inject those extra constructs into the RTL. So there are other ways, like with the Accelera's IP tagging approach as well, where they add extra metadata in to avoid having to do that insertion into the netlist. So I think that's an area of interest for a lot of people, not just you. It's a common thing, and I think we're trying to drive that through the Accelera IP tagging initiative. So I think that's a good forum for you to contribute to, because it is a forum by engineers for engineers. So I think that would be a good place to target some of your energies.
Okay. I think we're unfortunately going to be out of time. Just to kind of wrap up, I think there were really two things that kind of came out for me on this, that there's an adoption or completeness of your processes, and then there's a whole set of technology, infrastructure, and execution items that are needed. And if you have only one or the other, you're not going to be executing as well as you could. But if you can actually get the right tools and the right solutions and get that high level of adoption, and then you can really start to execute as a leader in the space like these guys have. So I'd like to thank our panelists very much for coming on down, and thank all of you for joining us.